Hello guys, I'm Fake Flip from Brazil and I'm here in Turkey today to explain to you about the tides. Tides are very different. Everywhere you go in the world, they're different from place to place. They can be a lot bigger in some places and a lot smaller in others. Here in Turkey, for example, there are virtually no tides on all seas around Turkey. Turkey has here where I am in Didim in Turkey. Here this is the Mediterranean or the Aegean Sea, the Aegean and the Mediterranean. So here the tides are negligible. I'm going to turn the camera so you can see how negligible the tides are at low tide. It's low tide now. Check it out. So this is low tide. Here it's about 12-13 centimeters. Very, very small tides. In other places you get 12 to 13 meters. Like in Liverpool in the United Kingdom, and also Bristol in the United Kingdom, you get there 11 12 meters of tides. Here you get 12 centimeters of tides. So when we talk about tides, we have to consider these things. So believing in gravitation of the moon or diamagnetism of the sun, things like that, things related to the stars and the sun and the moon have nothing to do with the tides. They don't explain what happened in the tides. If they did, then there would be some correspondence between the times where the sun goes and all the incidents of the sun. The tides would respond to that. There would be a bigger area where the tides would happen at the same time. We don't see that in places like the United Kingdom. We have tides completely opposite in times, in very small distances, like Bristol and Bournemouth, and also sizes between Bristol and Bournemouth, like the distance is about 100 miles. 100 miles in distance, but the size of the tides is ridiculously different. In Bristol you get up to 12 meters, 12 meters of tides. In Bournemouth you get about 3 meters of tides. So the sizes are very different. And also you have there the times of the tide. So when one tide is high, the other one should be high as well. They should be high and low at the same time. They should be up and down at the same time if the stars above, like the sun and the moon, made the tides. It's not what happens. You get high in one and low in the other, or one growing and the other lowering. So the tides don't correspond in times. You can get completely opposite times in a very short distance, like London and Medway, for example. Also any other place in the world, like for example in the Bay of Fundy, you can get 13 meters in Port Elmhurst. In Port Elmhurst you can get 13 meters, and in Port Elgin, that is about 20 kilometers away, I don't know, 20 miles away, really close by, you get just 1 meter. So it has nothing to do with the moon or the sun. It has nothing to do with that. So what causes the tides is a system of springs underneath the water. So underneath the water we have lots of springs, plenty of freshwater springs, just under all the ocean, just as many springs as we have above the sea level on the continents. There are also plenty of freshwater springs in the ocean, and they have a lot more pressure, and also they can be intermittent or permanent. So those permanent, perennial springs, the ones that make rivers, for example, they inject water all the time. But there are plenty of intermittent springs which only inject water for some period of time and then they stop, for another period of time and then they stop. And that explains the tides, because some tides are also longer than others. There are places that take 5 hours to grow until the high tide. Some places take 6 hours to go until high tide, and some places go for 6 hours, then they get lower, but not so much lower. They get for example, they go up to 4 meters in high tide, but then in low tide it's 3.5 meters is also pretty high tide, but they consider as low tide. That's because the springs that are underneath the ocean, they work in an intermittent period. So when one starts, the other one may start a bit later. So they can work for about 9 hours. So you get 6 hours of a very high tide and another 3 hours of not so much high tide. So that explains the tides, for example, near Vancouver in Canada. They can last up to 9 hours, still very high. So about 6 hours in 4 meters, and then about another 3 hours, 3.5, which they consider low, but it's not actually low. And then it goes to another high or to a very low of a 1 meter much later on. So this is what explains. It's the springs that we have under the ocean. So there are plenty of them, injecting fresh water all the time, in intermittent periods, but they keep injecting, renewing the oxygen in the water. Otherwise, the water would become too salty, because the salt is already in the ocean, in the salt mines. There are plenty of salt mines, and that's why the ocean gets salty. Here where I am, for example, the salinity is higher than other places. Here in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, the salinity here is higher. Here is 38 grams per liter, 3.8%. Whereas to the western part of the Mediterranean Sea, the salinity there is 34 grams per liter. So that's about 3.4%. So 3.4% there, 3.8% here. There is more salt here than there. And the reason is the tides. The tides explain this salinity, because here there are very small tides. As you can see, the tides here, I'll show you again. This is low tide. This is low tide. Look. Low tide, you get a very, very, very small variation. So this is about 12 centimeters. That's the tides that we get here in this area of Turkey. So because of the low tides here, the salinity becomes higher. That's why there is more salt in this water, because there is less fresh water being injected here. That's why. This is also something that most people don't know. Salinity has nothing to do with tides. It's the opposite. The tides have to do on the salinity. They control the salt. And that's why in places with very small tides or virtually no tides, like the eastern part of the Mediterranean, the salinity tends to get higher. The same happens, for example, in the Red Sea. The Red Sea has 42 grams, 41, 42. It has a gradual salinity, just like the Mediterranean has a gradual salinity. So the closer to the salt mines, the saltier. And the amount of fresh water injected there is also very small. So the tides in the Red Sea are also pretty small, just not as small as they are here. Here it's even smaller. And the whole of Turkey has very small tides. For example, the Sea of Marmara. The Sea of Marmara to the south of Istanbul is also like this. Tides there are about 4, 5, 10 centimeters. Really, really small. They can be considered as amphidromic points. Many scientists call these places amphidromic points. They don't even know what amphidromic points are, and they just say it's amphidromic points because from these places the tides begin to be noticed. That's how they say. Well, amphidromic points are, in my conception, what finishes with the tides, what kills the tides. So the tide is the injection of water. The tides is the injection of water, and the amphidromic points, they suck this water out from the ocean. So the water is injected in many parts. In many parts, the tides are made, and then the tides spread around the ocean, spread over there, spread, and the level remains the same. So the level remains the same because there are amphidromic points which suck the water from the ocean constantly, permanently. There are many points like that. I don't know all of them, but I know many of them. So there are two in Norway, for example. There are 2 points in Norway. Like they make huge whirlpools on the surface because they keep sucking a huge amount of water permanently from that area of the Atlantic. Also in Scotland, in the Gulf of Corryvreckan, there is another one. And here in the Mediterranean Sea, there is one in the center of the Mediterranean Sea in Messina, Italy. So there in Messina, there is one amphidromic point. That's the amphidromic point of the Mediterranean Sea. So all the tides made in that area, because in Venice there are tides, you get up to 1 meter in Venice. There are tides in the south of Spain, France, northern Morocco, Tunisia. You get small tides there, about 60 centimeters, about, I don't know, maybe 80 centimeters, 40 centimeters. So it's about 4 to 6 times higher than this side. So here in this side we get 10 centimeters maximum, 12 centimeters, 4, 5 centimeters, really, really small tides. Because they get to here when they arrive here, the tides are already a lot smaller because they've been sucked there, and also they've diffracted in many of the islands. So they get here a lot smaller. But to that side there are some tides. So these amphidromic points is what sucks, removes the water from the ocean and probably brings it back to its place of origin. The place of origin is the primordial ocean. So we have a primordial ocean, and the water from the primordial ocean is pure, is drinkable, is pure water, and that pure water is what is injected from underneath the ocean, and also on above the sea level in the continents. We also have plenty of freshwater springs. About 99.99% of the springs is fresh water. Just almost nothing, almost very few of the springs that we have above the sea level contain salt or a gas or some sort of sulfate or sulfite or some other sort of like a iron. They can contain iron as well, but the majority, 99.9999% of them is fresh water. So that's because the water outside the firmament, the water outside where God is and the angels, that water is pure, and that water penetrates from underneath, and that's what keeps us alive. That's what keeps us alive. That's what keeps the levels of oxygen in the ocean good, and keeps the life in the ocean. Without that water, we would die. The ocean would become salty, just like the Dead Sea. It would kill everything. So that's the water from the firmament, from outside the firmament. The waters above, that's what keeps us alive. So and that's what explains the tides as well. So it's this is the explanation of tides, guys. Right? The water from outside, the water from the primordial waters, they penetrate from underneath in certain points. In points like this, in places like this, like the whole of the western part of the Mediterranean Sea, including the Aegean Sea, the Marmara, the Sea of Marmara also has no tides. The Black Sea has no tides. Also the Baltic in the northern part of Europe, the Baltic Sea has no tides. Tides in Helsinki, tides in Stockholm, they are virtually zero. They're even smaller than this. Here we get about 13 centimeters. There they get like 4 or 5 centimeters, nearly nothing. In the south of Norway, in Egersund, they have nothing. They have like 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters. In the Sea of Japan, in the areas of Metsui, in the areas of Totori, in the areas of Shimane, in those places they have virtually no tides. It's like this also, like 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters, 5 centimeters, like nothing. So in places like this there are no tides, and the reason is because there are no springs. There are no springs underneath. That's why, and that's the explanation of tides. It's the springs underneath in high pressure. When these springs they burst, depending how close they are to the surface also, and depending on their magnitudes, they can change, they can alter the surface of water. You can have that surface of water that is very similar to when you spring water from underneath a plastic pool, a plastic swimming pool that you have in the garden. If you put the water, injecting water from underneath in the pool, you get the same effect that you get in some parts of the ocean. You get that water opening in a circle in the surface, changing the texture of the surface of the water. The same thing you can get in the ocean as well. That texture becomes smoother, glassy. The texture of the surface changes, opens in a wide circle, and spreads over the ocean. So half of that circle comes to the coast, and the other half goes to the other side of the ocean. Sometimes if you have a channel, it goes to the other side of the channel. It happens in the channel, in the English Channel, for example. This is what explains the tides in the English Channel, where you have in the side of France, in Saint-Malo, you have, for example, about 11 meters of tides in one side of the channel. But in Bournemouth, to the other side of the channel, in Bournemouth, in England, you get only 3 meters of tides. So this is what explains the tides. So the tides open half come to one coast and the other half goes to the other coast, and some spread to the sides as well. So that's how the tides are made, from underneath, and they open and they change the texture of the surface in some places depending on the depth and also on the magnitude of these springs. So if they have a very high, very intense magnitude, they can change, and also if they are very close to the surface. So obviously if it's very deep, too deep, they will probably not change the pressure won't be enough to change the surface and create that effect of a different texture. But depending on the place, yes. So for example, in these images that you're seeing there, the depth there is 50 meters. So these sailors who filmed this and who showed this, they said that the depth they were was 50 meters only, and probably a very big and very intense magnitude of these springs. So also these the springs underneath the ocean, they also explain the timings of the tides, because you have tides with very different timings in very close by areas. For example, in London and in Medway, they're very close by. In England, right? London and Medway in England. Also places like, for example, Macapá and Belém do Pará in Brazil. They're also relatively close by, and you have very different timings in these places. Places like, for example, Bristol and Liverpool. They're very close by. However, the timings of the tides can be totally the opposite. So you might have a high tide in Bristol, but a low tide at the same time, in Liverpool. And the same can happen there in London. You might have a high tide in London, but in Medway, that is only about 40 miles away, you can have a low tide at the same time. So you can have one high and the other low at the same time, even in very close by areas. The same happens in Brazil, in many other places as well. So for example, you can have a high tide in Macapá, but a low tide in Belém do Pará at the same time. So this thing can even be done live. We could even open a live here in my channel, a live transmission. We could put an observer in one of these cities and an observer in the other one of the cities. They both would get into the live transmission through links that I could give the links. They could enter at the same time and show the tides, just like I'm showing here now. Show the tides right now in both, right at the moment, in both places at the same time, and people can see that even in close by areas, places like London and Medway, that is only 40 miles away, Bristol and Liverpool, I don't know, about 100 miles away, I don't know how far they are, Macapá and Belém do Pará in Brazil. I'm using these examples because I am from Brazil. Okay, there in Brazil, for example, you can get a high tide in Macapá and a low tide in Macapá at the same time. And also this can happen in many other places, in all places on earth, because this is a rule. And rules of nature, laws of nature, they never have an exception. If you see an exception, for example, to gravity, it's full of exceptions. It's so selective that we can hardly believe it. So anything in nature that has exceptions should not be trusted, because then that's not the explanation. The explanation never has an exception, because the laws of nature do not have exceptions. And the springs underneath, they are the law of nature that creates the tides. The law of nature of the tides is the springs. So there is never an exception in anywhere in the world. So if there are no tides, it's because there are no springs. If there are high tides, it's because there are strong tides. If you have, for example, salinity can change. Here, for example, we have higher salinity, but in the Bay of Fundy, in places with lots of tides, for example, in the Bay of Fundy, the salinity is less than 2%, less than 20 grams per liter near the rivers. Obviously, because of the water from the rivers, but also the water from underneath. So that water is fresh water, and that's why the water in the Bay of Fundy is almost no salt. It's very little salt, because there are very high tides there. And the same happens everywhere in the world. So it's a law, and there are never exceptions to that. The salinity gets higher here because there are no tides. There's no water being injected here where I am. So this is the explanation of tides, guys. It's the springs underneath the ocean, and also the holes that exist in many places, the holes that suck the water from the ocean. This is the explanation of tides. So you have an injection of water and water being removed. It's like the system of the Huron fountains. That is a permanent and perpetual motion of water being injected and being sucked at the same time. This is what explains the tides in our oceans, in the seas, and also in lakes, because there are indeed tides in lakes. Many people don't know that, but there are many tides in lakes. Lake Ontario, for example, actually all the 5 Great Lakes in the United States and Canada, in the North American Great Lakes, all of them have tides much bigger than these that you can see here. Much bigger tides than this. There, in Toronto, for example, in Lake Ontario, you get 1.5 meters, 150 centimeters. Here you get 15 centimeters. In Toronto, you get 150 centimeters. So that's 1.5 meters of tides there in Toronto. And that's a lake, and it's fresh water. So again, it has nothing to do with salinity. The explanation of tides is the springs underneath the ocean. Okay, guys who follow Nothin Fair's channel, my big friend Nothin Fair from Coffs Harbour in Australia. Big shout out. So it's Fake Flip here again to tell you a little bit more about the tides. Tides is a very extensive subject, a very long subject, something that demands a lot of research, and certainly just one video like the previous video I made is not going to be enough. So I'm recording a little bit longer, a little bit more for you, a little bit more information. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the salinity, about the salt mines, about the amphidromic points, and all the things related to the subject of tides. In the ocean there are lots of salt mines, just as there are many salt mines on top of the continents as well, above the sea level. There are plenty of salt mines. And where are they located? Salt mines are usually located in deserts and in the vicinity of deserts. That's most likely because during the flood, the big flood that we had a few millennia ago, when the fountains of the deep, they burst and sprung all that water onto the surface, together also with the water that came from outside the firmament. The waters above also flooded earth during the flood, so the salt was released onto the surface and spread over the land, creating the deserts. So if you observe the deserts of earth, all of them, the deserts of the west of America, South and North America, there are deserts with lots of salt lakes, salt mines, salt plains, salt deserts, whatever you call them. I call them salt mines. And basically they are nothing but deposits of salt. It also happened in Africa, in Australia, and parts of Asia. Strangely, it didn't happen in Europe, and that explains why the Baltic Sea has no salt. The Baltic Sea has very low salinity, and as opposed to the salinity of the Mediterranean, Red Sea, and other seas, the phenomena that we observe in the salinity of the Baltic is the opposite. So whereas in the Mediterranean we have a higher salinity to the internal parts of the Mediterranean, far from the strait is higher than near the strait, it means that the salt mines are located inside the Mediterranean. Now in the Red Sea it's the same thing. The salinity is higher to the inside of the Red Sea, and then it's lower near the strait. It's the opposite in the Baltic. The Baltic, we observe that the salinity is higher close to the strait. So it's a higher salinity near the straits in Denmark, and lower to the inside, so gradually lower to the inside. So it means that underneath the Baltic Sea there are no salt mines. So all the salt from the Baltic Sea comes from the Atlantic Ocean through the North Sea in that region. So this is the truth about salt. The salt was spread on Earth during the Great Flood. So most likely the whole ocean of Earth was a freshwater ocean. And the biggest evidence for this is the surroundings of the ocean. Antarctica is our great surroundings. It's our confinement. So the confinement is freshwater. if you observe, the ice of the confinement is entirely fresh. We can even drink from that ice, even today. So if that ice is fresh water today, but the ocean is salty, it means that the ocean became salty after that. First it was made fresh and then it turned salty. So that's how the salinity happens. It was spread over the continents, and it was also spread over the ocean floor. The ocean floor and the seas in general, they have salt mines, salt plains, salt flats, call them whatever you want to call. There are plenty of them. Some of them are known already after the invention of submarines. They've discovered some salt plains, salt mines, salt lakes. Our scientists call them brine pools. They're called brine pools. Basically, they're nothing but deposits of salt on the ocean floor, on the seabed. So that's where they are, and that's why the ocean becomes salty. So without the injection of fresh water, what do you think would happen? It's very obvious. For those who have the logics in place, it's obvious that the ocean would become just as salty as a hypersaline ocean or sea or a lake, just like the Dead Sea, the Great Salt Lake in the United States, the Garibaldal in Asia, or the Rakba in Senegal. It would become just too salty, and all the life would be extinguished from the ocean, and consequently we would die as well. So the importance of tides is notorious. The importance of tides is very visible in the question of salinity. And speaking about tides without speaking about salinity is nonsense when one explains the other and one justifies the other. So they are intrinsical, and it's impossible to speak about tides without speaking about salt. So having said that, it's also very important to know, for those who still wonder whether or not the springs may cause the tides or not, the springs is the only explanation to tides. It's a law of nature, has no exceptions, and all bodies of water that show tides, that have tides, all the bodies of water, they mandatorily, they must contain springs underneath and also holes underneath. So the holes are the amphidromic points. And it happens also in lakes. Lakes also have tides. I showed in the previous video. If you haven't watched, I recommend you scroll down in No Fanfare's channel and watch the video where I explain the tides. So lakes also have tides, and there are many types of different lakes. And the most interesting ones are the seasonal lakes called turlocks. So here in Europe, there are plenty. Actually, there are turlocks. This is something that many people haven't heard about. Perhaps you have never heard about turlocks in your life. But turlocks are seasonal lakes, and they spend the summers empty and the winters full. So when it's springtime, about spring, they begin to drain. They begin to drain, and they spend then the summer dry. And then when it's autumn, they begin to fill up, and they spend the winters full. So this is what happens in turlocks. And the turlocks, they have an yearly tide, but some turlocks, like the Caherglason here in Ireland, it's a well-known turlock for daily tides. This one has daily tides, and it's a small lake, a small loch, as they say, like nearly a pond, but it has daily tides. So it's very important to understand that the explanation of tides in the turlocks is exactly springs underneath and also holes in the bottom. These holes, they are called swallow holes, which drag and drain the water, or they can be holes that inject water sometimes, like springs, but they also become a drain hole. So these holes that inject water and also suck water through the same hole, they're called estavels, and the other ones are called springs. So the tides in turlocks, which exist, they exist in all the north of Earth. To the north of the inside the circle of the Cancer, which is the like Earth is a circle, right? So the smallest circle inside is the Cancer. So the Cancer circle, it represents the north of Earth. So whatever is inside the Cancer is the north, and in that area, not just in Ireland, the word Turlough is an Irish word which means dry lake. It means dry lake, but actually Turloughs don't only exist in Ireland. Actually, one of the most interesting Turloughs is in the United States, and it's called the Lost Lake. So the Lost Lake is a very interesting one because we can see the hole when it's draining. It happens every spring. Whoever lives in the United States or in the areas of the Lost Lake can see it in the spring. Many people have seen it. It's spectacular to see the water being drained down the hole inside that lake. And it happens in any other Turlough. They all have a spring and a hole. In the north of Earth, lots of Turloughs, and they spend the summers dry and the winters full. So it's an yearly tide that the Turloughs have. So the explanation to tides in Turloughs is springs and holes, and it's the same explanation for the tides in seas and also in the ocean, because there is no other explanation to tides. It's a law of nature and it has no exceptions. So what explains tides in one place also explains tides in the other place. We cannot have two reasons for the formation of tides. If you have a tide in a lake, if you have a tide in a sea, or if you don't have a tide in a sea, which is the case of the western part of the Mediterranean, Marmara, Black Sea, also the whole of the Baltic Sea has no tides. So the explanation is the presence or the absence of springs and holes. Obviously there must be a hole, because the amount of water that is injected is just too much. It would certainly flood Earth very quickly. Very quickly we would be underwater. Given the amount of water injected, not just by freshwater springs, but also by the freshwater springs that are on the continents. The continents also they're filled with freshwater springs, which make our rivers. So all the rivers are formed by spring. In case you've never wondered about, in case you've never thought about, but 100% of the water available, including the water that is in our bodies, they are 70% water. 100% of the water available, including the water of the rain, the water that comes out from our taps, all the water available on Earth, including the ones making the rivers, the lakes, the seas, and the oceans, all of them, all of this water comes from inside Earth through springs, and they're all freshwater springs. Very few of them are not freshwater, will contain some sort of a gas, sulfite, whatever minerals that they might contain. Some of these very strong springs that we have in depths of the ocean, they're so strong they come out with minerals, but these minerals, they are not dissolved in water. They end up precipitating to the bottom, and the water comes out, and it's fresh water, and it has no salt, so it's less dense. It goes to the surface and sometimes even changes the texture of the surface, as I showed on the previous video. So having said that, the tides, they are very important for our lives. Without the tides, our life on Earth would be extinguished very quickly. The ocean, seas, and lakes, the lakes that have salt, the salty lakes, they would become too salty, and many of them are too salty and have no life inside, like the Dead Sea, for example, has no life. It's not the case of the Caspian, though. Salinity in the Caspian is quite low because the salt mine in the Caspian is not located underneath the Caspian. The salt mine of the Caspian is located to the side of the Caspian and is called Garabogaskol, which is a huge salt plain covered by the water of the Caspian. So basically the Caspian has small tides of about 80 centimeters to 1 meter. So the water of the tides that are created inside the Caspian are enough for the Caspian to penetrate inside the Garabogaskol. That water then becomes salty, and at low tide the water exits the Garabogaskol through the narrow. There's a narrow passage in the lake there. It's a kind of a lagoon. So that's why the Caspian becomes salty. It's not what the pseudoscientists say. They lie about everything on Earth. They know very well. They know I'm not the only person on Earth who knows this. They know very well what makes the Caspian salty, what makes the ocean salty. They know that there are salt plains, salt flats, salt mines. But they insist in indoctrinating the people that first that the Earth is a ball, that the Earth is spinning, and also that the rivers bring salt to the Caspian, or that the Caspian once separated from the Mediterranean. It's another theory that they teach and that they preach. It's like preaching, that they preach in universities, that once the Caspian was part of a bigger ocean called Parenthesis, and that the Parenthesis divided, the waters divided, and then there was land in between both, and then the Caspian was separated from the Mediterranean, and that's why the Caspian is salty. This is one of these ridiculous theories that they teach and they preach in schools and universities because they refuse to tell the truth. Obviously, they refuse to tell the truth because the truth sets us free. The truth brings us closer to God. The truth brings light to the people, and that's not what they want. They want ignorant people. They want people who don't know anything and still think they are smart. So that's the reason why very few people know these things. Hello guys who follow North and Fair's channel. Fake Flip here once again to tell you a little bit more about the tides. Today I intend to speak a little bit more about the amphidromic points. Amphidromic points is a very special key point to understand tides and also to understand our reality. The amphidromic points, as our oceanographers and PhDs have learned, is nothing to do with reality. What they have learned is a set of lies. What they have learned is false information in order to make them stupid. That's the truth. So for them, amphidromic points is taught in universities as areas where there are no tides. This is how they learn in university. Or since there are no areas on Earth completely exempt of tides, so they consider also amphidromic points as places with no tides or where tides are negligible. Places like Turkey, for example. Turkey is a huge area, not really a point. So they clearly don't know what a point is. Okay, they clearly have no idea what a point is. Right? A point is a specific location, a set of very specific coordinates. That is a point. Now, the whole of Turkey, including the Marmara Sea, also the Black Sea, and also the Mediterranean and Aegean Sea, it's a huge area, not just a point, where the tides are considered negligible and therefore considered an amphidromic point. So in the maps that they release to our oceanographers with the amphidromic points, you observe huge areas of Earth, entire seas like the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the Baltic, the Black Sea, which is not even highlighted in their maps also. But we are talking about huge areas of Earth like the Sea of Japan and many other areas where the tides are negligible, nearly zero really. So they consider these as amphidromic points, and they don't question anything. They just swallow the information and say amen. And that's how the indoctrination carries on and on and on. And that's why today we have a legion of PhDs who are specialized in unicorns that don't exist, and they don't get to understand the reality that surrounds them. This is really sad, really terrible. But I am here to tell them what a point is. A point is a specific set of coordinates. So it's a very specific and restricted area where that is a point. So an amphidromic point is places on the ocean, very specific places on the ocean where a very special phenomenon happens. We have a vertical current of water. Amphidromic points are the only places on the ocean where we have a vertical and very strong currents of vertical water going down to the bottom. So the only places on Earth where you will observe these phenomena is the amphidromic points, and they're very dangerous, extremely dangerous, because they can drag almost anything down together with the water. extremely dangerous places. And all of the amphidromic points have a history of shipwrecks, drownings, bodies missing, some bodies found also, but they have a history of deaths included in their history, and no wonder why, because there is a massive hole down there sucking and dragging all this water out of the system for some sort of recycling. Our God has some sort of recycling plant somewhere, and this water goes back to recycling somewhere. We don't know where this water goes to, but the waters outside our firmament, they're always clean. That water keeps penetrating through all the springs on earth. We have countless of springs, not just here above the continents, above the sea level, but also under the ocean. We have plenty, countless of springs. And the injection is always fresh, always clean water. So somehow that water gets recycled, and only Lord knows how, right? So the amphidromic points, they are a key to our understanding of our reality, key to understanding about the existence of all our reality. So having said that, I don't know all of the amphidromic points, but I have researched quite intensely to try and find out as many as I can. So please, if you've heard of or seen, and if you have more information about them, don't be afraid to, don't be shy, just put on the comments if you've seen other places on Earth where you get vertical currents forming eddies and whirlpools on the surface with vertical, strong currents going vertically down to the bottom. Just share the information with me. I would love to learn more about the amphidromic points. But most of the amphidromic points, they are located in North America. So North America, the region of British Columbia, and also to the east coast of North America in the Great Lakes, and also in the borders with Maine and Canada, in the city of Eastport in the United States, the border with Canada. There you'll find a huge whirlpool called the Old Sow. So the Old Sow is a huge amphidromic point located there, which drags and sucks all the waters that are produced, the tides that are produced in the Bay of Fundy and in the North Atlantic. Also in the British Columbia, you'll find another, to my knowledge, as far as I know, there are 7 holes in British Columbia. 5 of those are located on the Cordero Passage, on the Cordero Channel. Actually, the Cordero Channel has a history of deaths, shipwrecks, and people dying. It is known as the most dangerous stretch of waters on Earth. It's the Cordero Channel in Vancouver, in the Vancouver area. So these are the amphidromic points of North America. There are 7, to my knowledge, on the west coast, and 2, as far as I know, 2 on the east coast. Also in Europe, you'll find 4. So there are 2 in Norway, the Moskenstromen in Lofoten, and also the Saltstromen. There are 2 well-known amphidromic points in Norway, also extremely dangerous. Lots of deaths and cases of disappearance and things, extremely dangerous. Also in the UK, here where I am in the UK. In Scotland, in the Gulf of Corryvreckan, there is also another amphidromic point, and the water goes vertically down and sacking, and again, lots of deaths and shipwrecks in this place. Also, you will find also in the Mediterranean Sea, there is an amphidromic point in the city of Messina. In the Strait of Messina in Italy, in southern Italy, there is also an amphidromic point there, and again you get a vertical current of water going down to the bottom. Lots of shipwrecks also in that area. There's a curiosity about this place because it is also mentioned in the legends, in the Greek legends, in the stories of Homer. this amphidromic point was mentioned because it was given as a monster in the water in front of another monster, which was Scylla. Scylla was given as a monster on the sea, and Charybdis was given as a monster in the water. No wonder why. Actually, it can be quite monstrous, these amphidromic points. They can actually swallow people. And also in Japan, there are two amphidromic points to my knowledge, both of them to the south of Osaka, in the inland sea of Seto, the Seto inland sea. On both entrances and exits to this sea, to the north is Naruto, and to the south is Kurushima. Both of these places are also very strong currents down, dragging a lot of water downwards vertically, obviously to the bottom, and then for recycling. And this there's a last one also to my knowledge in New Zealand. So in New Zealand, the Te Aomiti is amphidromic point. It's located to the north of the North Island. Between North Island and the island of D'Urville, there's a place called French Pass, and there is a hole, also with a extensive history of deaths and shipwrecks and people disappearing, right, and bodies never found again sometimes. So these points, the amphidromic points, they remove the water that is injected in the ocean. The water that is injected in the ocean comes from springs, not just above the sea level. I'm pretty sure that you've all experienced a spring at a certain point in your lives. If you haven't, I strongly recommend. It's amazing to drink water directly from the spring. But also underneath the ocean, there are countless of springs. And some of these springs are perennial, so they always inject water. But some of these springs are intermittent. So the intermittent ones produce an intermittent injection of water, and therefore the tides. The tides is nothing but an intermittent injection of water. But this water, if this water is not removed, obviously it will flood us. It would flood us if it were not removed. So the amphidromic points, they do exactly this. I hope the information has been helpful, especially to our oceanographers who have been fooled in universities with a terrible and false information about the amphidromic points. Amphidromic points are meant to be points, a specific set of coordinates, not huge areas of Earth as they are preached in universities. So I hope this information has been helpful and helps them free their minds and therefore set free the people. Right? That's why the scientists lie to them, to enslave their minds, and the true information, the truth, sets them free. So I hope this information helps them set themselves free. For any questions, of course, just leave them in the comments and I'll be more than glad to answer. Right? Thank you very much for having listened, and see you around, guys.